Good morning. Good morning, and welcome to a somewhat fragmented continuation of a study of the Psalms. My name is Reverend Lou Kilgore. I am serving as a pastor in this community of the High Mountain Presbyterian Church. One church, two campuses. We're located here at in Franklin Lakes, on Franklin Lakes Road, 730 Franklin Lakes Road, and we're also located in North Haledon at 198 and 200 Squalbrook Road, where we operate a low tuition, high quality preschool and daycare, serving the families of Passaic County with much needed opportunity to take care of their children in really loving and wonderful circumstances with great staff while they go off and work and seek to support their families in every way that's good. But today is one of the ministries that I've been doing, sometimes pushed to the margins because of demands of time, but I will continue to try to make a sincere commitment to this reading through the Psalms. I've never done this before. We're taking one psalm at a time, reading it through. I usually take some time of preparation in advance of actually doing the study, not just for what I'm going to teach, but also for my own reflection. The Psalms are full of good resources to try and do those kinds of meditation, reflection, self-awareness, and I hope to be able to lead you through this psalm today in continuation of the other programs that we have done. Today we're doing Psalm 21. And before I read it, I just want to say a personal word. When you read a psalm like Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," it seems immediately applicable to our lives, right? Many of us have been in circumstances where there are valleys of death that we have to go through. There are things that concern us. It's good to be reminded in good times and in hard times that God is with us, walking with us, ahead of us, behind us, coming to gather us up when we get lost on the way. The psalm that we're looking at today, you have to dig a little deeper. Psalm 21 is a royal liturgy. These are words we believe were taken from the practice of the gathering of the community in the time of the dynasties when there were kings and their families living in big palaces who ruled over the people of God, over Israel, over Hebrews, the children of Abraham and Sarah, the people who had been liberated from the work camps in Egypt, the people who had received the inheritance of a land they believe was their manifest destiny. But in their life, of setting up their life, these psalms are, most of them, or some of them, are written from that time. A time when a people of God, a people who followed Yahweh, a God who they claimed was not just one God among many, but was the Lord of the whole world, the creator of all that is. And they were followers of this God. They were involved in a relationship with this God, who they had come to know was a God of relationships, who cared about their lives, who, it comes up in the text today, is full of loving kindness. The God of the universe, Yahweh, is a God of loving kindness, is the underlying claim. But life is structured for these people in what could be seen as a very difficult means of existence. Not too much different than today, but that where they lived, partly because of the history of how they came to occupy the land that they lived, they were surrounded by enemies. Enemies in that time were people who basically threatened your way of life, who did not recognize the land inheritance of God-given land, but also had a history of their mothers and fathers having been attacked and removed from the land by this people called the Hebrews, and there are resentments all around. And so, sorry. As a story of the people of Hebrews, the children of Abraham and Sarah, seeking to live out their mission as a people to be a blessing to all the families of the earth, sometimes it becomes very difficult to be a blessing. In some ways, the first task is just to survive, and then maybe figure out how to be a blessing. It's into that context that the community, the people identified as the children of Abraham and Sarah, the Hebrews, believe the only way they can survive as a people is to have a king, to have a political hierarchy, a king who would organize. Basically, the job of the king was to organize the defense. It was a defensive posture. They raised an army for defending their way of life. The job of the king was to, the idea is we'll get a king and we'll be more secure. We'll be ready for our enemies when they attack. We'll be able to create a space in which we can live and know that we are safe, and that the king will represent us to God. And the king will help us to be reminded that we don't live and survive on the strength of the king. We live and survive on the strength of the king's relationship to God and of our relationship to the king. Now, I'm jumping into the psalm. This is a liturgy. It's a hymn, if you will. But it'll teach us something, I think, that might be relevant for how are we to live? How are we to live in a world that, life has a lot of pitfalls. It has dangers. It has diseases. It has enemies. How are we supposed to live and have life, and then not just survive, but to live in such a way that we are rising above our own circumstances and actually trying to help out other people, trying to make a difference in other people's lives. Life without that kind of human behavior, one helping another, one seeking to be a blessing to another, would be devastating. It's just too broken of a world to exist without people helping each other. And sometimes it's your time to help, and sometimes it's your time to be helped. And those are sort of the law of the land. It's the rule of life. So these people, these Hebrews, are trying to create a self-defense that creates a wall of safety around them, if you will, that will allow them to conduct their mission in life, their mission to be a blessing to the families of the earth. Share their crops, to make sure their scales are just and fair when they trade in the marketplace. These are the things that they are called upon, along with charity, seeking to be the source of help to those who are in need of help. This is the mission of the existence of the people of God. Now, I think all those things are important for us to rehearse over and over and over again, so that what happens in this liturgy, we will understand a little better for our time. But with all that said, let me read to you from Psalm 21, verses 1 to 14. This is called a royal liturgy. So imagine, I don't know, Christians would call it a church, a big gathering place. Maybe it's even outside. But there's three parties at the conference, at the gathering. There is the people, and then there is the king and the royal entourage surrounding the king, and then there is an acknowledgement that God is present as well. And a song is going to be sung, and in that song is going to be a rehearsal of what's the nature of the relationships here. This is a rehearsal of relationship structure. This is a reminder. Who are you and who am I and how am I related to you for each of these major parties, for God, for the king, the royal kingdom, and also then the people, the regular, ordinary people of the land. Now remember, the king's life in this period of time, the structure of the royalty is about war. Because the king exists. The king, go back to why a people who followed God and trusted God through the desert, through the wilderness, through the inhabitants of the promised land. Why is there a king? I thought God was king. Well, the earthly king provides one function in their minds, and that is to keep an organized army to be able to defend themselves in the reality that they are surrounded all the time by enemies who seek their destruction. That's the reality. All right. I think that'll help for you to understand the language that is used in this hymn, in this liturgy. And then we'll dive deep into it and think, well, what is this for us? What does this mean for us? Is this not just some boring piece of historical literature that I have a hard time making any contact with? We'll try to dig in and get behind that shell and see what might be here for us. Verse 1, to the musical director, this is attributed as a Psalm of David. O Lord, in your might the king rejoices, and in your victory how greatly the king exalts. You have given to the king his heart's desire, and you have not withheld the request of his lips. For you meet him with blessings of goodness. You set on his head a crown of fine gold. He asked life of you, and you gave it to him, length of days forever and ever. His honor is great through your victory. You bestow upon him splendor and majesty, for you give him blessings forever. You make him see your face in joy. For the king is trusting in the Lord, and in the loving kindness of the Most High. The king will not be shaken. Your hand will find out all your enemies. Your right hand will find out all who hate you. You will set them against your face like a fiery oven. The Lord will consume them in his anger, and fire will devour them. You will destroy their fruit from the earth, and their seed from among the sons of man. Though they have extended evil against you, have planned evil devices, they will not succeed. For you will make them turn back with your bowstrings. You will aim against their faces. Arise, O Lord, in your might. Let us sing and praise your strength. Now, I just want to talk through the text first before I begin to speak about the narrative of it. I'm just going to go through it. And in the first part, O Lord, in your might the king rejoices, and in your victory how greatly he exalts. The king evidently is, in this period of the time, the king is winning. He goes to battle and he wins. But they're being clear in the liturgy to say these are not victories of the king. This is not the king's victory. This is God winning in struggles, winning against the enemies that would threaten the people. And the king is receiving the honor. So the king has asked, evidently before battle, the king asked God for victory. Please help us to win this battle. And then also, you can hear it, the king asks life from you. This isn't just about regular life. The king is asking to please survive this battle. Please allow me to live through this. And they're celebrating now that, in fact, the king did survive. And that this prayer will go on each time, hoping this king will survive or this king's children will survive so that the people can survive, so they can live. The king's honor is great through your victory. That's an interesting thing. See, it's like he's saying, well, the king is being honored, but you, O God, are the one who gave the king the victory, and you are the one who bestows upon him splendor and majesty. You give the king blessings forever. You make him see your face. Why? Because the king, the ruler, the queen, the leader of us as people is trusting in you and in your loving kindness, and will not be shaken in that trust. Your hand will find out all of your enemies. Your right hand, God, will find out all who hate you. You will set them against your face. This is like, you'll be thrown into a fiery oven. The enemies of God and of the people the Lord will consume them in the Lord's anger, and fire will devour them. You will destroy their fruit from the earth. You'll see to it that they're not able to sustain their own life because their crops will fail. And their seed from among the sons of man. There were great theological understandings of why some nations and tribes multiplied and had numerous children, and why some didn't seem to be able to have children at all. They were saying this is one way in which God will continue to fight against any tribe who rises up to seek the extermination of these people of blessing. Though they have extended evil against you and have planned all kinds of evil devices, they will not succeed. And you will make them turn back, O God, with your bowstring. You will aim against their faces. Arise, O Lord, in your might, and let us sing and praise your strength. So as we look more into a way of searching out the relevance and sort of picking this up as not just some ancient script that has to do with kings and wars and battles, it's important to keep in front of us a sense of the metaphor of the life of the people and the life of the king and the life of God as our life too. The king, sometimes I think in the past I've been sort of getting off the track. The king is not God. And the king, truthfully, in this passage especially, does not represent God to the people. That's not how it works in these Psalms. This is not about a divine ruler being the king. In true form, when it's on track, there's no contest. God is the divine ruler. God is the one who is in charge. God gives the victories and God causes the losses. The king, and I don't know if you will, but I find the king represents the people. So when the king prays, and the king, or the ruler, can be the queen, if the human ruler is working on and keeping relevant the ruler's faith in God, that represents all the people's faith. There's a relationship between God and the people. But it is not that the king cannot represent God. The king is a human. But the king's ability, willingness, and prayers for strength of faith, confidence in God, will be rewarded with God winning the protection of the people. I don't know if that's as exciting to you as it is to me. The ruler's desire or request alludes to a prayer for divine aid and victory prior to departing for battle, and having set out for war in faith. The king was then met by God with blessings. Only God is king. Only God is the monarch. Only God is the ruler of the world. And human, the king is the human representative of divine kingship, could only receive the royal status from God. The king prayed to live. And it can be confused here that maybe the king is praying for immortality. It's important to know that in this period of time, they did not have a theology of immortality. They just didn't. There were ways in which your life could go on after you died, but it was ways that you and I would recognize, as very this world, not afterlife. When I was working in my office on preparing my comments for this text, hanging right over the short part of my desk is a picture of my dear mom and dad. And I look up at that picture from time to time. It's a great picture of them. It's a great representation. They look so alive. And in their, even though they're gone, they live on. But what the king was asking for was, could I live through this battle? Would you give me life? And in future battles, life after life. He asked that his life be preserved in the time of conflict, and on returning home alive, his prayer had been answered in the gift of life, the length of days. He does pray that forever and ever, but it's not about immortality. It's not about even life after death or after. It's a reflection of the theology of the period of the monarchy. The broader context did not imply any view of eternal life. It just hadn't developed in their mindset. The king had received not only life, but honor, splendor, and majesty as a consequence of God achieving a victory. Hang on with me. This will come down to earth a little bit. So, I've said this many times. The Bible, the God of the Bible, is a God of relationships. And those relationships are complex. They're not just you obey me and then you get something in return. They're not transactional relationships. You do this for me and I'll do this for you. The relationships are fully complex. And it becomes complex when the basis of the covenant or the relationship between the king or the people themselves and God is a word. It's trust. Trust is what's required. Trust in God. And trust and faithfulness through times when it looks like trust is being rewarded with failure. The language of this gathering in this, pardon the over contemporizing of it, this gathering of the church. They get together and they are rehearsing the fundamentals of their ability to survive. A fundamental ability to survive in this world where you are threatened by challenges, by enemies of all kinds, is the fundamental agreement is trust. Trust. And I like the word trust, not just faith. Faith sounds a little too religious to me. It's trust. There are two partners in the covenant, God and the people. The king represents the people. I'll go back to that. The king is not God's spokesperson on the earth. The king, the ruler, represents the people. When a high elected official from the United States, maybe the president, travels to a foreign country, the receiving country is called upon to recognize that in that person all of us are represented. So if the ambassador or the diplomat or the king or the president is received and a great banquet is set before them, that is not a personal honor to that person. It is an honoring of the people of the nation they represent. What a concept. And the people, God's fundamental character in this relationship of life, and I wish that we had been able to keep track and to keep in force that the biblical witness of the God of the Bible is loving kindness. This is God's engagement in the relationship. God is a loving and kind God who expresses that love in ways that can be touched and can be seen and is full of kindness. So God's fundamental character in the relationship is loving kindness. And the response of the king, represent all of the people, was to be one of trust. God's loving kindness is unchangeable. It goes to who God is. God cannot be other than loving kindness. But the people's response, the people's part in the relationship requires that it be maintained. It must be renewed. It must be reassured. It's a work in progress. God's loving kindness towards human beings is immutable. But on this side of the relationship, there is brokenness, there's fragileness, there's forgetfulness, there's hostilities, there's resentments. And in order to overcome them, the people, that's us, then and now, need to keep returning their own attitude to ones of trust. We fall off the trust wagon. And that relationship of trust must be renewed in order to prosper. So in this moment, this liturgy, their version of coming to church is their way of doing the fundamentals of the covenant faith are declared and affirmed, reinvigorated in this essential character of life. It's one of the challenges, I think, in terms of the questions that would go out to people who used to religiously attend every 7 days a gathering where great hymns would be sung and sermons would be preached and stories would be told and shared about concerns of tragedy and encouragement would be given. All of that behavior that we refer to as, church is threatened and challenged now because with COVID, we don't get together. We don't have the times of covenant renewal, not just for the people, but for the pastor. These relationships are fragile, and they can quickly become thought of as not essential. I can survive without it. The question is, can your ability to trust in life, can your ability to have faith and survive the absence of any of that kind of reinforcement? And I think the writer of the Psalms and the story of the witness of the covenant people would be a caution to us to say, you cannot survive in trust and faith on your own. the way the commentator puts it here, the fundamentals of covenant faith are declared and affirmed, and they need to be declared and affirmed. The psalm recounts the blessings of God received by the king and expresses that the promise that because of the king's faithfulness, the enemies would experience the curses of God. They would be defeated. If Israel, if the nation, if the Hebrews, the children of Abraham and Sarah, had been defeated, it would be a curse upon Israel. If it failed its covenant commitment. But so long as the people, through their representative, the king, remained trusting. The substance of the liturgy is to, in a way, reenact or to build a resurgence of this tender and fragile thing that we as human beings are called upon to do, which is to trust. I was, one of the things that is a part of the, worldview, their way of looking and understanding the events of the world, is that these people, the Israel, the children of Jacob and Abraham and Isaac, with their almost lost identity to us, which is their identity was they were blessed by God to be a blessing. There's a mission involved in the reception. You will be my people and I will be your God, and together you will be a blessing to all the families of the earth. In the period of time that we're talking about now, the monarchy has been established, and there's a promise that exists in a way to David the king, which is to the monarchs that come, if you will be faithful and you will trust in me and you will allow me to be the source of your confidence in life, then you will win, you will survive. And in this liturgy, there's a return to the basics. The monarch and the gathered people recall that victory and deliverance in their life had never been achieved and would not be achieved on the basis of military strength alone, but only in the strength of God. Now, I was unable to go to sleep, decided I would stay up and watch a movie on television, and a really great version of the Battle of Midway was being presented after Pearl Harbor in World War II. The thought among the Japanese was they had one good surprise strike against the United States, but they believed they could completely annihilate the Navy and take over control of the Pacific shore of the United States. And so there was a secret plan for a battle to be taken place, and they would overtake the island of Midway in the Pacific. And the movie recounts, yes, there was military strategy. Yes, there was technology. There were code breakers, and there were efforts, great human efforts. But one of the things that comes out, both written on the words of the Japanese admirals, and also in the mind and the heart of the American strategists, was, wow, the fact that when the Japanese fleet arrived, the Americans had already planned a counterattack, and they sunk 4 aircraft carriers, and they won. The United States won the Battle of Midway. The consequences of winning were not attributed ultimately to superiority of what was left of the U.S. Navy. Now, in non-religious terms, the writers of the film talked about coincidence, sheer coincidence of comments that were made and thoughts that were discovered, communications that were overheard that allowed the victory to happen, but not because of anything you could point to where you would go into it. The American troops, especially the pilots from the aircraft carriers, were convinced that they were going to lose the battle. They did not have what it took for them to win, and yet they won. There's experience after experience in many little parts of the story, and this is just the way the story is told because it unearths what our deeper conviction is, same as these people, and that is the victory is not ultimately due to the superiority or the strength, but that somehow, if you want to call it God is at work, or that justice will win, or that somehow the arc of history leans towards justice and mercy. The Japanese and their aggression to dominate the world along with the Nazis were stopped, but they were stopped in some ways, the psalmist would say, by the hand of God. By the hand of God. The remembrance of the past evoked not only victories, but also the fact that those victories had been the result of divine activity. And I want to challenge you today to think about your own life in terms of the winning, the times when you've won, when the challenges were overcome. I know this is true in my life, that when you go back and you try to be as factual as you can be, you recognize that I don't know how else to say it, that there's a power at work that allowed you to be victorious, but you cannot take all the credit for it. You cannot take the credit for the victories in life. And remembering the past then is supposed to establish a precedent for the future, for how you will approach the conflicts that come. But if you think about the past, you think about how you got where you are. We sing hymns in church that talk about, the road we have traveled has been marked by blood and by conflict, but here we've arrived where we are, and we are here because of the victory of God has given, that loving kindness and justice will prevail in the world ultimately. And that's important then as we turn to the challenges that we face for the future. We will not be overcome, not because of our strength, but because of the strength of God and of God's love in the world. But the memory of the past is given to create present trust in this moment. Therefore, I will not fear, not now, which in turn becomes and forms the basis of future successes and victory. The expression of this complex of ideas and time inevitably must utilize the language of both praise and prayer. Praise for what has been done in the past. I thank God. The many versions of this come up all the time in sort of civil religion when microphones are shoved in the faces of outstanding players on the field, and they say, to what do you attribute your success? And there's something right, if theatrical, about them saying, I give glory to God. I didn't win this. This isn't my strength alone. I give thanks and glory to God. That God is winning this for me. There's something deep in our own understanding of how life is that makes that true for those who really believe it. And how that becomes powerful is that willingness to do that, praise to God for what has happened, and anticipatory praise for what would be done, and then today a prayer that the potential blessings of the future would materialize. In the liturgy, and this is in their liturgy and in ours, whether it's a liturgy of thanksgiving for the victory of a battle or whether it's just life itself, in the liturgy, it crystallized all the hopes and the aspirations which constituted the covenant people's reason for living. Their reason for living. Their understanding of how we got where we are. To remember it accurately. We did not get here by our own strength or our own wisdom. We got here because life demands that we trust. And therefore, we will trust in the future. We will commit ourselves to say we will not let the fear of the future overwhelm us, but that we will remain in trust, because in the long run, even though there are times when it seems like evil will win everywhere, but we will be faithful because of the experience of the past. It'll give us strength to face the future, but it brings us right back to the present moment, praying and working on and developing that we have every reason to trust God in the present. So, we travel from ancient times when there are monarchs among the people, and we travel now to our very own lives today. What is the basis of our trust? What is our confidence for the future? It's not about us. It's a confidence in God and in God alone. And sometimes in ways we can see immediately, and sometimes in ways that will take a long period of time to come about, to come around to love and to faith and to justice. But it's there. God is operating in the world. And our job is to be people of such trust that even in the times of tragedy and of loss, we look to our neighbor and we attend to being a blessing to the people who are traveling this life with us. And we're ready to tell the story of how we got where we are, how we survived the way we did. And we do not give credit to ourselves, not ultimately, but we recognize, like in the Battle of Midway, oh my goodness, if it had been one less communication that was received, or one less willingness of the command in Washington to trust the voices of the little people on the field, the Japanese would have completely destroyed the U.S.'s naval defense mechanism. And here we are today. And there you are today, my friends. You have survived to this day. You may be sad. You may still be filled with resentment for, quote, battles that you feel like you lost, or things that you prayed about that didn't happen. But a rehearsal of past times when you know you've made it through, not on your own, being among people who will strengthen that commitment, and remembering how faith grows. How faith grows. Faith grows from a specific way of looking at the events in life and remembering the meaning of your life, the meaning of my life and our life together in faith. I love the benediction. May the Lord bless you and keep you. And may the Lord bless and keep those who are your friends and your neighbors and your relatives and your family. And may the Lord be kind to you, be gracious unto you, and teach us how to be kind and full of loving kindness to one another. There you are, my friends. God bless you on your way. I know we're all trying a new round of effort to stay safe, although COVID is penetrating most of our shields of defense. We will win. We will win. This virus has its limits, and God will bring us to a day where we will celebrate the death, the burning up of this virus. And when we do, I pray that we all will give our thanks and make another story in our history of God's loving kindness and faithfulness to us as a human race. God bless you, my friends, and I'll see you next week.